Page through 21, the last one for chapter 9. So copy that down to have your table complete. Okay, so this is page 20. Okay, solving trinomials by factoring. First example, notice the first thing is to make sure our equations are equals to 0. Then this means this is just a binomial, and that means I can't use factoring like we've done before, so we just look for a GCF. So we're going to look for a GCF. Notice there's an x in both of these, so that means I can pull out an x out front, and then that means I'll have 1 left over, so x times x is x squared, minus when I pull this one out it'll be a 5, and then it equals 0, so that the GCF is basically the x. And this was our GCF factoring. At this point, this is split into 3 parts, where if I was to imagine this being your first part and this side being your second part, and what we're going to do is we're going to set each part equal to 0. So it's like the first one, I'd have x equals 0, and then on the second part I'd have x minus 5 equals 0, and then I need to solve. The first one is already solved for me, so this is already one of my answers. On the second one I have a minus 5. I need to solve or isolate the x, so that means I have to add 5 to each side. Those 5's cancel out, and I have x is equal to 5, and that is my second answer. And this is for actually solving them. We're going the extra step. Notice these are equations because they have an equals and then they're equal to something, and they should be equal to 0. On my second problem, it now is a actual trinomial that you're used to seeing. Okay, on this one, because it has 3 parts, and notice it has the equals and a 0, so I had to make sure it's equal to 0. I need to check to see, is there a GCF? And if I'm looking at this, I have an understood 1 in front of the x squared. Here's a 2 and here's a negative 5, and 5 factors of 5 are 1 and 15, and then 3 and 5. Factors of 1 and x is just 1x, and then the 2 is just 1 and 2, so there is not a GCF at all on this particular listing. So that is taken care of. Now I just need to factor like we did all last week. I realize this is a negative 15, so I'm going to put negatives down one column, and then this is where I've got to shoot for my target of a 2. And remember, I multiply my columns. Let me get my highlighters. The first column I was highlighting with yellow, and the second column I believe I'll highlight with orange. Maybe that won't black out my values. So that means I'm going to have 1 times negative 3 is negative 3. And remember, I'm adding these. 1 times 5 is 5. Negative 3 plus 5 is actually 2, and that matches my target. So there are my terms. If I place them into my binomials, this would be a 1x and a 1x. Remember to crisscross. That would be a plus 5 and a minus 3. That would be my factoring. Now if I put this into my equation, I would have actually 1x plus 5 and 1x minus 3 is actually equal to 0. Now this is where I need to set each part equal to 0, and on the setup between my parentheses, this is my first section, and then here's my second section between my parentheses that I have actually established there. So I'm going to take these problems on the other side here and have the first one. I'll have 1x plus 5 equals 0, which means I'm going to subtract 5. I'll have 1x is equal to negative 5. If I divide by 1, I have x is equal to negative 5. There's one answer. If I take the second one, that'd be 1x minus 3 is equal to 0. I'm going to add 3 this time. So I have 1x is equal to 3. If I divide by 1, x is equal to a positive 3. So my two answers, I'll highlight there. So I have x equals negative 5 and x equals 3 for my solution. I think actually I'll write these over to the side so we can actually see them. Okay, on this top section, x is equal to 0 and x is equal to 5. So we have two answers. Okay, if I go to number 3, the trick on number 3 is that it is not solved for 0. Okay? I've got to solve for 0. That means I need to move the negative 25 back over to the other side by adding it. And that'll give you x squared plus 10x plus 25 equals 0. This is a trinomial, so as before, there's not a GCF because I do not have a leading term. So I'm just going to go into factoring. So that means there's an understood 1. That'd be a 1x and a 1x. 25 would be 1 and 25, and then 5 and 5, or I could have 25 and 1. This is a positive 25, and my target is a 10. So when I multiply my first columns, and I highlight my second columns there, I do 1 times 25, which is 25, plus 1 times 1, well, that's 26. That's not my answer. That's not it. If I go to the next column, 1 times 5 is 5, plus 1 times 5 is 5. That gives me 10, and there's my answer. If I write my binomials, that means I'll have 1x plus 5 times 1x plus 5, and it will equal 0. This is where I break it into parts. So basically I have my first section is the first binomial, and the second section is the second binomial, so I need to solve them. If I take the first one, I have 1x plus 5 is equal to 0. That means I need to subtract 5. Gives me 1x is equal to negative 5. Divide by 1, and x is equal to negative 5. If I take the second equation, I'll have 1x plus 5 is equal to 0. If I subtract 5 from both sides, I have 1x is equal to negative 5. Divide by 1, and once again, x is equal to negative 5. So on this particular problem, the way they have it set up, both answers come out to be equal negative 5. So this one actually only has one answer. Okay, the fourth example that I have here, I'm checking to see if it is set equal to 0, which it is not. So that means I'm going to subtract 40. So those cancel out. I'll have a 0 equals, and that means I have 3x squared plus 19x minus 40. This is a trinomial, so I need to factor it. The first term is 1x and 3x, and that's it for 3 because it's prime. But 40, there's going to be a bunch for 40. Let's see, well, maybe. Have 1 and 40, 2 and 20, and then 4 and 10. And then I'll have 10 and 20 and 40. So this way needs 4, 2, and 1. So I have completed it all the way around. Also, this is a negative 40, so I'm going to put a negative down that left side. I'm going to highlight my first columns, yellows, and I'll highlight my second columns, my orange, so that now I can tell that my target is 19. I'm looking for 19, so 1 times a negative 40 is a negative 40, and 3 times 1 is 3, and that gives me negative 37, so that's not it. If I go to the next one, 1 times a negative 20 is negative 20, and 3 times 2 is 6, and if I calculate that, I believe that is negative 14. That is not my answer. If I look at 1 times negative 10 plus 3 times 4 is 12. If I calculate this one, I believe that is 2. And that's not my answer. I do 1 times negative 4 plus 3 times 10 is 30. That appears to be what, negative 20 or positive 26. And if I go to the next one, I'd have negative 2 plus 60. That would be a negative 58 or positive 58. And I think I'm going in the wrong direction totally here. So let me pause a moment. Okay, well, I think I missed a factor, which I just now noticed was a 5 and an 8 actually go into 40. So if I try these two numbers, I did a classic thing like you guys. I missed one of the factors. If I try them out, I believe if I try 1 times negative 8, which gives me negative 8, plus 3 times 15, that one gives me not the correct answer yet. What is that, 7, I believe? So if I try the next one, 1 times negative 5 plus 3 times 24, this one finally gives me my correct solution. So I missed one of my terms in my binomial. Alright, so if I write my equation, I'm going to write it down here on the bottom here. I'm going to have 1x plus 8 and then 3x minus 5. Make sure you have it in the correct order. I have to set it equal to 0, and then when I break it into its parts, I have the first side and my second side. I need to solve to find my equations. I'm going to squeeze it in over here. So I have 1x plus 8 is equal to 0. I'm going to subtract 8 and have 1x equals negative 8. I divide by 1, x is equal to negative 8. If I take the second equation, 3x minus 5 equals 0. I want to add 5 and have 3x is equal to 5. I'm going to divide by 3, and that does not divide evenly, so I'm going to leave it 5 over 3 is my solution. So if I highlight those as my answers, and then I'm going to write it over here on the side, x equals negative 8 and x equals 5/3. Those are my answers. Okay. On page 21, I have listed the actual steps that I was saying to you that said I want to make sure that I move all my numbers to one side of the equation, which means I have a 0 on one of the sides. Then I need to factor that trinomial. If it's a binomial, I need to pull out a GCF. But that's what we were doing before. The new step is right here where we set each part equal to 0. So if I had a GCF, I put it equal to 0. The first parenthesis I set equal to 0, and then the second parenthesis I set equal to 0. And then we solved each part. and that told you how many parts you had, told you how many answers you should have. That's it for our notes.